Hey guys, Thomas is the Genie here, aka Mustached Tom, here to finally review Resident Evil Village. If you end up enjoying this full review, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also make sure to check out those links in the description. One will head you over to my Discord, second to my Patreon, third to my PayPal. Any donations are greatly appreciated. With shilling out of the way, I'll remind you at the end of the review. And with that, let's get back into Resident Evil Village. So, as of this recording, of course, I just finished the main story and played a little bit of the extra modes of Resident Evil Village. And, of course, as per usual, I'll be splitting it up between the two sections that I don't normally do for video games, which is breaking up between its story and its gameplay. So, let's start with the story. So, this takes place sometime after Resident Evil 7's story, where Ethan and his wife are in some other location on a vacation, and their little free life is interrupted by Chris and his goons that are a part of whatever their group is now called, because apparently they are no longer a part of the BSAA, which is apparently evil in both this game and in 7 question mark? Yeah, we're gonna talk a bit more about that, coming up, but in terms of Ethan, he gets, pulled away with, the wife getting shot down. However, the vehicles are attacked and he's left in some, wintry, literal village, where he eventually comes across all these, estranged creatures like werewolves, vampires, quote-unquote, puppets, and goopy blob things. So, that is the basic premise of the story, and much of the story follows when you get to a new area. You meet with one of the pre-mentioned villains, and you learn a little bit about them via much like how they were trying to do in Resident Evil 7 with the family members as well. Now, here's the thing about that, is it's very clear through both story and gameplay that they were trying to follow the gimmick of Resident Evil 7, that being that people were totally engrossed with Resident Evil going first-person view, even though every other installment before Resident Evil 7 was in the third-person perspective. Now, the biggest issue I see with this is that the gimmick, aka the style in which you play, overtook both the story and gameplay. This is something that I think I've seen before, where the gimmick of something is what's praised the most, and when you actually shed the gimmick away, the first-person thing away, Resident Evil 7 and 8 are both kind of shit in terms of both their story and gameplay perspectives. Now, I can talk about Resident Evil 7's story, but I can't talk about its gameplay. Well, that is to say that it is the same as Resident Evil 8 as far as I can tell, so I can say that much at least. But, in terms of its story, I will be focused on Resident Evil 8. So, it is very clear here that, again, the gimmick was pushed over the story and gameplay, and that can be seen no further better example than in Chris Redfield. In both 7 and 8, he's abruptly a villain, or an antagonist at the very most, which is something that Chris never was, even in as far as 6 was concerned. And don't get me wrong, Resident Evil 6's story, from what I can remember of it, is pretty bombastically crazy. But that is to say that at least what I can give Resident Evil 6 is that the gameplay felt like pretty good, comparatively speaking. Um, so yeah, in terms of that, Chris's character goes back and forth between he's not gonna tell you versus, oh, I should have told Ethan about this whole situation, but I didn't, and like all of this nonsense. You can just hear it in the writing and Ethan's narration throughout the game as well. His lines, very particularly. Ethan does not become a character until the final act of this game. That is how bad the story is. So we have a character that has been ruined. Chris Redfield has been ruined since 7. We have Ethan, who is not a character until the very end of the game, and what they do with him is try to repair the gameplay perspective of his character through trying to explain what happened in 7. And again, as crazy and absurd as in terms of pure story elements are concerned that is, again, I can say, to play devil's advocate in this game's favor, it's the only moment in the game where Ethan has any sense of character, any sense of like, oh, I'm actually starting to care about this character, but by then it's far too late. And again, I think if they have given more hints of this throughout the story, maybe a little bit more nuanced dialogue through Ethan's perspective, I think that this could have easily been handled a lot better. But that is only one of the mistakes, and furthermore, you would have to completely rework Chris into how he fits into this narrative, because how he is now, it is again just fundamentally not the Chris Redfield that we are used to seeing. And from 6 to 7, again, I think the gap between those two, it feels like you're seeing a completely different character. Which is something that is very familiar if you're familiar with other game or movie franchises completely flipping their main characters for whatever reason. So it's not even that surprising anymore that Capcom would also fall into this trap of, since the story has been going on this long, that the main character suddenly became evil. It's so annoying, but it's something I'm just used to at this point. In terms of the end of the day, I can't really give the story that much credence. Even when you're looking at the antagonist, comparatively speaking, and most people did praise this, is that the first section, aka the Lady Dimitrescu section, is the most developed, and then from there it kind of just dwindles and dwindles and dwindles, which is never a good sign. There's very clearly a lot you could have done to fix that as well. So even from that perspective, the story isn't that strong. So if I were to give it a total score, and if I were to think of it as objectively as possible, I think the highest I can conceivably give this game is a 4 out of 10 in terms of story, and I think most of that 4 would go to, say, Lady Dimitrescu's little section of the game. Outside of that, though, there isn't really much else to compliment, and the rest of the game just sort of, its story falls apart. And in turn, I feel like the gameplay isn't that far off, surprisingly. If this is how Resident Evil 7 played, I'm actually quite shocked that people found that game so fascinating to play. If the story was stronger, then maybe I could see why, but if the gameplay matches this, oh boy, I would have not been enjoying 7 either, even with such a strong story. I would have been like, oh, that's a really good story, shame that the gameplay sucks. So the gameplay feels very sluggish and rigid, and just on the first-person gunning aspect of it, whenever you're like hitting an enemy, there's something about it that doesn't feel as fulfilling, and it compounds itself in the mercenary mode even worsely so than in the main stuff. You know, you have your blocking mechanic, which is a bit goofy, but whatever. There is sort of moving around the puzzles in this game, which there aren't a lot of, and they require very minimalistic thinking through. Like, you could just solve it pretty easily, which is why I put quotations before the word puzzle. And in terms of upgrading, I think that's like the only system that sort of alleviates any of the issues in terms of like impact that your gun will have at the beginning versus say what it will have at the end. But again, all of these systems, even down to the organizing of your equipment, is all taken from Resident Evil 4 and just compounded in a first-person version that doesn't feel as oomphy as even 4 did. So there's that. I will say, out of all of the mercenary modes, I would easily say that this is the weakest of them. Even weaker than the original version of Mercenaries, which is, like, very different from what you've seen of, like, I want to say, as far back as Resident Evil 5 Mercenaries was concerned. Like, the difference between that and, let's say, I think Mercenaries started in 3, I want to say? The difference between 3 and 5 Mercenaries, I forget if 4 had Mercenaries, I think it did. Yeah, it had solo Mercenaries, that's right. The difference between 3 and 4, then, it's very different of how Mercenaries worked. The first Mercenaries was more about, and 3 was more about saving people, and getting your time up doing that. Killing monsters sometimes was a requirement, if I remember. It's been a long time since I've played 3 Mercenaries, but since 4, it became primarily focused on defeating monsters within a certain time frame. And since 4, it's stayed pretty consistent with that. 4, 5, and 6, of course, 5 and 6 being co-op playability within the Mercenaries modes, fun music even in 6, and I don't know if Resident Evil 7 had Mercenaries mode. It probably had some other mode, but it's here at 8. And the feel of it is very, very weak. The gun shooting, you can see the damage numbers, which isn't something you see in the main game, and it really, just seeing that and how spongy the enemies are, like the common enemies, it becomes very, very clear that this was a misstep even in that regard. So, it has the weakest Mercenaries mode, it has the weakest of the main story in terms of its gameplay as well. Any of its highlights, again, I can say, come from a pre-established better game. Resident Evil 4 is a better game, in both story and in gameplay. That is just objectively true. So I will say, in terms of its gameplay, I'm actually going to go even lower than its story. I'm going to go either at a 2 or a 3 out of 10. Very, very weak put together here. I think I would go for a 3 since I didn't spot any bugs on top of the game. If there were bugs, I probably would have went with an either 2 or 1. So at least it has that going for it, but that's still relatively low on my scale. And just to re-emphasize the story, I know I said I would talk about this, the whole Chris Redfield and BSAA thing, I already gave the score of 4 out of 10, but I figure I might as well talk about this after the fact. Again, it just comes completely out of nowhere. BSAA being evil all of a sudden is completely out of nowhere in this game. And even in Resident Evil 6, I remember BSA, that's what Chris worked for. That is the group he worked for, as well as the other individuals that were with him. So it is so bizarre to see BSAA suddenly and abruptly used for bioweapons and them moving in like they're the new Umbrella. It's so unnecessary, and it puts Chris in a weird middle ground, even though they already try to flip him kind of character way. That doesn't do the character any justice, but it doesn't make the character worse, but it doesn't do him any favors either. So we shall see what happens, because apparently after the remake of 3, they're considering doing a remake of 4. Of course, 4 is one of the ones that I think people are going to be most wary about in terms of its execution and how it's delivered. Hopefully they've learned to avoid this first-person gimmick thing, because honestly, I don't think it did them any remote favors. I don't think having it in first-person mode elevates horror in any significant way that it's worth doing. Again, putting the gimmick over the characters and gameplay is never worth it at the end of the day. So I hope that they go because they're so used to doing third person, I would probably rather see them stick to just doing third person. And, you know, for if they're remaking 4, to refine even the parts of that may be looked a little down upon, or just like completely refining it to, you know, keep it elevated, because even 3 remake was a little bit underwhelming in that regard. I remember going through that one in terms of its length, so hopefully they don't encounter that issue with 4 remake, if that is something Capcom is currently working on, question mark, I don't know. In terms of this, I think that if Capcom's still willing to do first-person stuff, I think it should be separated from its main titles, like, have it be like a side thing. This is Resident Evil 8. This should have never been the case, even in 7, I don't think. And people really did cheer for the gimmick, overwhelmingly so. And I think that's a shame that people are so easily fooled by a new gimmick, and I don't think that that should ever be the case. To win over people with just a gimmick, you have to prove without anything else, is that you can bring to the players a good story if you're going to have one, and more importantly than that, really good gameplay, because at the end of the day, that's what's going to keep people coming back. And as far as I'm concerned, I'm done with the Resident Evil Village. I'm not going back. I'm not touching. I'm not going to 100% the game like this. I'm not going to go back to it. I'm just done with the game. It was a really poor purchase. I would say out of all of the Resident Evils, I would probably say this is the weakest and lowest in terms, if I were to think of just remembering all the other Resident Evil games and where I would rank them. I would easily rank this one the lowest on the tier list if I were to make one. And that is my full review of Resident Evil Village. And if you ended up enjoying it, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also, make sure to check out those links in the description. One to my Discord server, the other to my Patreon page. Any donations be appreciated. And until next time, everyone, bye-bye.